Welcome to today's episode of The Brand Strategist. Today we're talking about why controlling the narrative is no longer enough. Where power lies not in storytelling, but in making the story real. This past week, we've witnessed institutions collapsing not just under the weight of their failures, but because society is realizing the stories they've told for years no longer align with reality. Consider the theater of this moment. Airline executives squirm before Congress trying to explain how they racked up $12.4 billion in seat fees, while insisting they create a fair and equitable setup for their customers. The gap between story and reality becomes almost comedic in real time. Nobody enjoys flying in your airlines, one senator finally erupts. It's a terrible experience. I vouch for that. I hate flying. I've been thinking about this, though, while homeschooling my kid. We came across something so obvious that somehow still shocked me. In the graphic novel version of Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari states plainly what I had missed in all my years of branding work. Corporations are just stories we tell to create cooperation. I'd never seen it that way. And now we're watching these stories lose their power to convince in real time. The past week has shown us the cocoon cracking in some pretty remarkable ways. The government in France topples. A presidential attempt at martial law that lasted barely 6 hours before dissolving in the face of public resistance. Airline executives confronting the limits of extraction-based thinking. A healthcare system facing its contradictions. Old stories are collapsing. For thousands of years, institutions have told stories about bringing value to society. What's fascinating in our pattern is that it's not just systems failing, it's their underlying narratives collapsing. Governments told us we maintain order and progress. Then South Korean lawmakers had to climb walls to enter parliament while soldiers pointed rifles at protesters, making the gap between protecting democracy and suppressing it impossible to ignore. In France, the government didn't just face political opposition, it faced a crisis of narrative legitimacy about who it actually serves. Airlines claimed we connect the world. Now executives can't explain their bag bounties without tying themselves in knots, exposing what happens when their story crashes into a "we'll charge you for breathing" reality. Health insurance companies promised we protect people, until the gap between protecting people and denying claims for profit became so wide that their CEO faced their own deny, defend, depose motto turned against them. Traditional brand strategy often tries to craft better stories. But what we're seeing is that story crafting isn't enough when the underlying cooperation agreement is broken. There's a new power dynamic in town. Stories don't work just because they're well told anymore. They work when they align with lived experience. Power isn't in controlling the narrative. It's in making the narrative real. Here's what's fascinating. Each of these failing stories represents a different way that human societies have tried to organize themselves over time. Governments tell stories about rules and order. They say, we maintain order and progress. Businesses tell stories about achievement and growth. They say, we connect the world. Service organizations tell stories about caring and community. They say, we protect people. What's remarkable is that all these stories are falling apart at the same time. It suggests something bigger is happening. People are starting to see connections between systems that used to seem separate. They're looking for ways to keep what works from each approach while fixing what doesn't. There's something deeply evolutionary going on here, but we're going to have to get into that on another day. But I will say this. Every evolutionary leap looks like chaos from the ground. But zoom out and you'll see something beautiful happening. We're moving from siloed power over systems to interconnected power with frameworks. When South Koreans instantly reject martial law, they're not just resisting authority. They're demonstrating evolved collective sensing of authentic versus inauthentic power. When governments dissolve and reform, it's not collapse, it's systems learning to adapt. When airline practices face public scrutiny, it's not just accountability, it's the market evolving beyond transactional relationships. When healthcare systems face their contradictions, they're not just confronting profits, They're being called to evolve beyond extraction. And we're not even talking about stories taking years or months to lose power anymore. We're talking hours. The collective capacity to sense and reject misaligned institutional narratives is developing at an unprecedented rate. So, what does that mean for you? What's your move? Well, from what I can see, I think you have 3 options. 1, keep telling stories that people increasingly don't believe. 2, try to force cooperation through institutional power. Good luck with that. Or 3, close the gap between who you say you are and what you actually do. That's it. Those are your choices. And based on what we're seeing, options 1 and 2 come with expiration dates. The brands that will survive this evolutionary shift are those with the smallest gap between story and reality. That's where authentic power comes from in an age of collapsing narratives. In practical terms, we've got to stop trying to sell a better story and start focusing on making the story real. Here's 3 steps you could take. Audit your gap. What's the story you're telling? What's the reality people are experiencing? How wide is that gap between those 2 things? 2, face your contradictions. Where are you saying we serve but practicing we extract? What stories are you telling that you know aren't true? Or have you convinced yourself that they are? And 3, close the gap. Not with better storytelling, not with more sophisticated PR, but with fundamental realignment between story and lived experiences. This shift doesn't mean throwing everything out and starting over. We still need some rules and structure. We still need growth and innovation. We still need care and community, but we're learning to combine these things in new ways. Power isn't in controlling the narrative anymore. It's in making the narrative real. Thanks for tuning in for another one of my rants. If this episode resonated with you, share it, reflect on it, and most importantly, take action. Until next time, stay aligned.